Well, hey, everybody. I want to introduce to you a friend of mine. I am Reverend Jonathan Beckham Brink, and I have here with me today Reverend Dr. Chris Wilson. And Chris, we're excited to have you with us today. And as you know, we have you on to specifically talk about interfaith conversations. It was something that came up with our regional youth council that really wanted to make sure that we had a tool on how to have these conversations. And so we're so glad that you could be here today to help us understand better how to engage in conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. Glad to be here with you today. Jonathan.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to just jump right in. And with that, it's so what mindset would a person enter when we're interacting with another faith tradition? What's the mindset that we take with us when we're having those conversations?
Well, one of the things I think of right off the bat is, especially with youth, high school youth in particular, they're probably better positioned than any other generation to do interfaith work. Is if they really did kind of an accounting of who all's in their schools, it is the most interfaith context that most of them are in. They are with students, friends, acquaintances that are Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist. I mean, they're already intermixed in their school system. So they're already kind of more equipped than most of us. Most of us have to seek out those relationships versus already having them set up in your school system. So there's kind of an immediate advantage in terms of a mindset of thing. These interfaith relationships are already all around me. I just have to have eyes open enough to pay attention to who's out there that I can connect with. So there's that piece. I think that's an advantage for high schoolers to begin with, which is one. And then for those that are soon to go on to college, it's the same environment. It's such a multicultural, multi-faith context in college. So shifting from high school to college is a great kind of beginning place, I think, in terms of a context of meeting people sooner or with greater ease in other contexts. So that's a part of it. The other thing I would say is a mindset is a lot of times how we approach people of a different faith. How we enter into that engagement with someone else. And I've kind of lifted up in my own mind maybe some things that are unhelpful or things that are helpful. And I think probably the biggest unhelpful thing is I'm a Christian. I'm not giving up my Christianity. And so if I'm going to engage someone in another faith tradition, I want them to come believe what I believe. And so the idea is I'm entering that relationship with maybe an idea of I'm right, and they believe something that's different. And if I'm right, then maybe I need to convert them to my tradition or what I hold dear in some way.
It automatically makes them lesser than the wrong persons.
That's right. So if you set up from a conversion or I've got my faith, their faith is different. I don't believe that faith. So how does this dialogue work? So I think I would consider that an unhelpful approach because I think our own tradition talks about equality, humility, have an open spirit to others. The whole gospel is, we're kind of in a weird place with Christianity these days, but the origins of our tradition is a community on the margins. And Jesus did ministry on the margins. And so to me, a more helpful approach is when we engage in a conversation with someone of a different faith, I'm looking at it as discovery, appreciation for what someone else believes. That myself and someone from another tradition, we're both religious travelers. We're both religious pilgrims trying to figure out how to make meaning in the world and a sense of purpose for myself. And that maybe we're both equal holders of truth. I think that's one of the things I discovered along the way is that I don't have to have all the truth as a Christian person. I was in an interfaith dialogue once, and we talked about, would we still be the same faith if we were born in a different place in the world? So I'm I'm Christian. I was born in Texas. The probability of me being Christian is pretty high in terms of a religious inclusion in some way. I was born into a Christian family. If I was born in Pakistan, I probably would have been Muslim. If I was born in India, might be Hindu or Buddhist, or, I think kind of the idea that I hold this unique universal truth just because I believe what I believe. I think of the origins of where we came from and what were the probabilities that we believe what we believe anyways.
And so that can be a really difficult place for some youth and adults to come to that conversation, because there's that, what do I do with my own identity then? It's the, if I'm not converting, or if I'm not trying to prove someone else wrong, or if I'm trying to prove myself right, how do I come to that conversation to not change somebody else or not to change myself? Where does that line draw for you?
Yeah, Michael Kinnaman, who was a well-known disciple, theologian, talker of faith, I remember him once talking about dialogue, and he said, true dialogue is that you enter that conversation with conviction. You share what you believe, and that you want the other person to come to that conversation with their own convictions of what they believe. But in order for it to be a dialogue, you both have to be open to changing how you think. If you enter the conversation with your convictions with no room for growth, that's not a true dialogue. And that you have the opportunity to be changed in the midst of that conversation. That someone has some idea that I never thought of that before, that's really cool, or whatever it is. And so a lot of times we typically think, I'm either Christian or I'm not Christian. And I don't think it's an either or kind of thing. I've been involved in interfaith conversations for 15, 20 years in one capacity or another. And I have learned to appreciate so much about other traditions, and other traditions have actually informed my own, or other traditions have confirmed things of my own tradition. But as an example, in the Buddhist tradition, I actually took some classes at TCU. Got to see all your TCU garb today. I took a class just exclusively in Buddhism at an undergraduate TCU from Andrew Fort, who was the professor back then. And I kind of said to myself, instead of me trying to gauge my faith against Buddhism, when I enter that class, I'm going to pretend as though I'm not Christian and learn as much as I can about Buddhism. Not that I'm going to give up my Christianity, but to try to learn as much about that, not trying to discern what's right and what's wrong, and then just let that religion be presented to me in a way that I could learn as much as I could. And I would say in the midst of that class, one of the things that I encountered was Buddhist contemplation and Buddhist meditation ended up teaching me more about my Christian prayer practices than Christianity ever taught me.
Yeah.
Another example is in the Islamic tradition, we have, they pray 5 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot I admire about Islamic prayer practice. When those 5 times enter, most of them have iPhones, and they have a little signal or a little call to prayer that sounds off on their phone. And if they're at work, they're at the house, they're wherever they are, they literally stop what they're doing, and they have a 5-minute prayer ritual that they go through 5 times a day. So they literally stop whatever's going on. Most Christians pray when it's convenient, pray when it works out, pray when they're in need. Muslims pray, they basically say God comes before everything else. And there's nothing in my life that's more important than that God relationship. And so there's this admiration of their practice of prayer that says God comes first. And sometimes in our Christian experience, God comes second because our own agenda comes first. So those are just some examples of, I would say, instead of an either or of I'm Christian, you're not, is I think there's a lot of learning and interplay and interfacing back and forth that actually informs or equips us as Christian people.
So that's beautiful. And it kind of gets to the heart of your second question, really, even, which is, why do we interact with other faith traditions? And it seems that a part of that, at least, is based on relationships. And learning more about your own faith as you engage with others, because it can help inform your faith.
I think so. I've found that when I have to communicate, it's one thing in seminary, they often say sometimes you have these small little windows to share your faith with another person. You have to have what's called a little elevator speech. You got to be able to kind of condensely. When you have to explain your faith to another faith tradition that's not familiar with your faith, you have to be pretty clear about what's important. You can't just, well, I kind of believe this, it's kind of this, and they're going to say, well, what kind of faith is that? You don't really have any kind of firm convictions here, Mm-hmm. And so engaging with another faith actually pushes you to be at least more concrete of what you actually believe. And I think we progressively grow in our faith, but in that moment, that's what I believe. It may be different a year from now, but at least in the moment, this is what's important to me in my own tradition. But it's really about when you open up that way with a person of another tradition, you discover this authentic relationship with one another, that the religious boundaries over time kind of dissipate and fall away. You're just two people that care about each other and are trying to make a difference in the world. And we're sharing space on this planet to make the world a better place. And I think one of the reasons we want to engage other faiths is we have lots of myths out there that are false myths about other traditions. And when you have true relationships with other people, you actually learn about a faith, not through a social media post, not through some negative thing you hear on the news that is trying to drive ratings. You're actually having a real relationship with a person, and you get really authentic experiences of how that person lives out their faith. And it gives you a whole different perspective than what the world teaches us about other faith traditions. So it's partly about relationship building, but also I think more honest understanding of how other faiths live out their life. As an example, every world religion has some version of the golden rule. Mm-hmm. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Every religion has, most world religions have a high ethical standard of human behavior and human rights. And we can find a lot of common ground. And we talk about, well, this group wants to kill other people, and that's all just false myths. They're rogue groups. They're not part of the mainline component of that faith tradition. So I think kind of discovering others, unearthing what we believe, and what you soon discover is there's a Muslim gentleman who recently passed away. We were friends for 10 years. He was a Muslim orthopedic surgeon. And I remember him telling me once that he prays before every surgery, regardless. He doesn't know anything about someone's faith. He doesn't know anything about someone else's religious life at all. But he says, when I perform surgery on that person, I feel it's important for me to pray silently that this person received the best outcome in this procedure. I'm praying for me, he said, to be as equipped to do the surgery, but I'm praying equally for the recipient of the person I do surgery on to get the best possible care. Yeah. And so you've got that kind of perspective of a Muslim you just don't hear very much. So I'll kind of stop there. I can kind of go on.
Absolutely. So it seems to me that we come to the conversation in a way that really allows us to be discovering and appreciating and looking for ways that we can be holders of truth, and not just in ourselves, but with everybody around us, and seeing other people holding on to truth as well. And that we're building relationships, that we are coming with conviction of what we believe, but also trying to understand more about why we believe or what we believe. So in the end, then, I guess, is what would we want to hope to be the result of these conversations and engaging with other faiths? Because we know that it's not about conversion. It's not about necessarily looking for capital T truth or universal truth. So what is it that we're hoping to get the result of?
I think one would be, one discovery would be that yourself would be changed. I remember C.S. Lewis says, we pray not to change God, we pray to change ourselves. And I think that's part of the interfaith component, is we're engaging so that we become a different person, not that we're some person that's going to convince other people of things. I think we become a different person because of that. I think the second part is that we learn more authentically who lives in the communities in which we live. We typically, our human nature is to gravitate to people that look like us, talk like us, believe like us, and interfaith engagement allows us new opportunities to really learn more about the wider city or community in which we live, because every community is very diverse, both racially, religiously, and so we can kind of live in some homogeneous mindset, but that's really not the world we live in. And interfaith kind of encourages us to learn more about really who's in our community and who we need to be caring about in our community. And then the last part I would say is that the more relationships we forge across religious lines is the greater the impact we can have in the world. If all Christians in Tarrant County, where I used to live, if all Christians in Tarrant County wanted to tackle issues of poverty, you could do a lot to solve issues of poverty. But then you add, if all Christians and all Jews and all Muslims and all Buddhists and all Hindus said, we want to tackle poverty, the impact just gets exponentially greater. And so the more people we know and can be genuinely connected to, some of the social issues of the day can be not necessarily solved, but can be worked on together in a more impactful way.
Thank you so much, Chris, for this first part of the conversation. I really appreciate it. I know that you are very aware, but I'm going to tell our viewers that this is just part one. I invite you to tune in to part two that'll be available as well if you'll search for that link, that will have a panel of people that will be interfaith partners that will be engaging with Chris in this conversation to maybe show us an example of what it looks like to really engage in those conversations with people of other faiths. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, Jonathan, just a little teaser. The plan will be for 4 of us to be in a conversation together. It'll be a mix of male and female, and it'll be a Protestant, a Catholic, a Jew, and a Muslim. So it'll be a mix of male and female in that group. So I thought as a starting place, it might be helpful to start from the Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And then this could just be a sampling of even widening out to some of the Eastern religions, some other religions. But I thought it might be a good beginning place for sampling some of that, at least 3 traditions that have some similar roots to them. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Chris, and we look forward to that second part of the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan.
Take care.